This is GM Daniel Naroditsky. We have a classic matchup for you. Jan Nepomniachtchi with the white pieces and Carlsen with the black pieces at the 2022 FIDE World Blitz Championship. And Magnus Carlsen with one e4, e5. He's played the French a whole lot in the World Blitz, but in this particular game, he does not mind a draw. He plays the Berlin. Nepo says, I don't want the Berlin endgame. I want an anti-Berlin. And we have a very, very popular line as Nepo trades his bishop for black's knight on c6, damaging black's queenside pawn structure, but in return, yielding the bishop pair. This type of structure has been so well studied over the last couple of decades. Both of these players have had this exact position against each other multiple times as Carlsen twirls the bishop that he has just recaptured, and he slides his own dark squared bishop back to d6 in order to lend additional support to that very important pawn in the center. Jan Nepomniachtchi castles kingside, and black actually has a major choice here. There's a fork in the road. Black could move the queen out from d8, as Vladimir Kramnik was known to do in the end of his career, and then castle queenside. He won some nice games, but Magnus Carlsen, he likes to play more positionally. He can, of course, also castle to the same side. He can castle kingside, and then the battle frequently shifts over to the center and the queenside. Let's see what the world champion decides. He's taking his time. He clearly indicates that he takes this decision very seriously. Will he play queen e7 or queen d7, or will he continue to follow white by castling kingside? Carlsen has taken 30 seconds now, and as he is wont to do, Jan Nepomniachtchi has handled the opening very, very quickly. Another idea that black has to be very careful about is the prospect of the d-pawn moving up to d4. Notice that black's bishop on d6 and the knight on f6 are unforkable squares. So after d4, e takes d4, white could slide the pawn up to e5 and fork two of black's minor pieces. So that is a tactic black has to be very careful about. And speaking of which, Carlsen decides to push his pawn up to c5 and establish the clamp on the d4 square. That pawn now cannot move up to d4, and the pawn on c5 can be supported with b6. I think it's safe to say that Carlsen is not going to castle queenside. He moves his queen from d8 to c8. He's going to castle kingside, and he's going to try to keep control, as much control as possible over the center, and contain the possibility of white pushing the pawn up to d4. In the meantime, Jan Nepomniachtchi continues to play quickly as he slid his knight up to a5, putting pressure on b7, and followed it up by playing b3. This was the real reason he moved the knight away from b3. He wants the square for the pawn, and then he wants the b2 square for his dark squared bishop to put pressure on Carlsen's e5 pawn. First, he slides his knight back from a5 to c4, and the battle is revolving around that e5 pawn. Nepo jumps to the other side with his other knight, knight to g5, forcing a trade of black's bishop for the knight on c4. And now we have a very interesting pawn structure in the center. Both sides have a lot of damage on the queen side, doubled c-pawns for both players, but it doesn't seem like neither side has really any significant weaknesses in the center. The c5 pawn and the e5 pawn, they're both very well protected by black's bishop on d6. That's not the nicest looking bishop. It's not going to win any beauty contest, but it's doing the heavy lifting. It's doing yeoman's work defending c5 and e5. I think Magnus has succeeded in equalizing, but not equalizing on the clock. He keeps looking off to the side. He seems a little bit concerned. I don't know about what. Maybe he's thinking about his tournament situation, but he's down to right around a minute on the clock, and we're barely out of the opening. But here goes the world champion, f6, f5. What a committal move as he rips open the king side and perhaps even the center. And Nepo says, okay, I'm taking on f5. Give me that e4 square. White could try to maneuver his knight from f3 to e4. Instead, Nepo brings his queen up to e2, and perhaps the queen could sink its teeth onto e4. What was the idea of opening up the f-file? Well, it was to activate black's rook and to put pressure on the knight on f3, and then Carlsen could slide his knight from d7 to f6, and perhaps later on prepare a pawn breakthrough in the center with e5, e4. But if he plays knight f6, then Nepo could deploy his bishop to b2, and then perhaps his rook could come to e1, and Carlsen could suddenly have a hard time defending the e5 pawn. And so he decides to keep his knight on d7. Instead, he makes some improvements on the queen side. He plays the move b6, and maybe he wants to bring his queen out to b7, a fianchetto of the queen, not something you say every day, and then move the other rook from a8 over to e8 or to f8. But whatever he wants, he needs to decide it fast. Carlsen down to 30 seconds. God, he is not playing quickly here. Nepo still with over 2 minutes on his clock. That is very, very typical. Of course, Jan Nepomniachtchi is known for playing very quickly, even in blitz. And both rooks coming to the center. Rook e1 and now rook e8 by Carlsen. The e5 pawn is still pretty well protected. In fact, all of black's pieces, except his queen, are currently protecting the e5 pawn. And we mentioned this maneuver a little bit earlier. The knight swings from f3 to d2, and now it can go forward to e4. That is a very nice central square where the knight is looking at both sides of the board. And it seems to me that Nepo has won the early middle game struggle. White's position looks absolutely great. All of the pieces are breathing. They're all playing. The knight on e4 is phenomenal. But for the time being, well, the world champion is still very, very solid. The knight on e4 looks pretty, but what exactly is it going to attack? That's the question. How is Nepo going to create actual chances against Black's kingside and against Black's center? And Carlsen, he continues to improve his own position. He moves his knight away from d7 and back to f8, and clearly the knight is heading for e6 and then perhaps either to f4 or to d4. So the world champion is not going to wait idly by for Nepo to improve his position to the maximum. But Jan continues to improve his position, and Black's clock continues to dwindle. He's down to 10 seconds, and the rook from e4 is threatening to move to g4, and so it does. Black's queen is not feeling too comfortable. f6 was actually the only escape square for Black's queen. It was almost trapped, and now Nepo can continue to harass the queen, and he does just that. Knight e4, queen f5, again, the queen with only one retreating square. But there is no way that I can see to trap the queen right here. The knight can move back to g3. Nepo has a draw in his pocket, but obviously, given the time situation, the draw is the last thing on his mind. Bishop comes out to g5, attacking the rook on e7. Carlsen with only 5 seconds, moving the rook back to e8. And now the move knight g3 looks even more terrifying. The queen will have to move back to g6, right into the path of a potential discovered attack that can be exerted by the rook on g4. But I actually don't see an effective discovery. The bishop on g5 can move in a lot of different directions, but whichever way it moves, it's going to open up at least one retreating square for Black's queen. So I still can't see a way to trap the Black queen, and maybe that is what Nepo is thinking about. He himself is now down to 1 minute. Carlsen intently looking at the position, making sure that his queen remains alive, and somehow he has actually maintained fundamental soundness in his position. The e5 pawn is still very well protected, so Nepo, he's got a nice looking position, but Carlsen isn't going to lose by himself. Nepo has to continue to find ways to put pressure. The knight does drop back to g3. Where is Nepo going to move his bishop? Or is he going to support the bishop with the move h4? He moves the knight back to e4, and Carlsen, I would assume, should be very happy with the repetition of moves here. 4 seconds on the clock as he slides the queen back up to f5, and Nepo, 39 seconds now. He doesn't see anything that he's truly liking. He's down to 30 seconds now. And in a time scramble, I don't think Black is really any worse here. Nepo moves his knight back to g3, and is he going to take the draw here? Is he going to go for the repetition? No, he's not. No, he's not. He plays h4. He supports the bishop, and we're going to get a good old-school barn burner here. We have a knight versus bishop situation. The knight, it moves back to e4, harassing Black's bishop. The bishop moves back to d7. And here comes Magnus's rook as it sinks its teeth into f4, offering the rook trade. And Nepo could not have refused that trade because he would have lost the pawn that he moved to h4 a couple of moves earlier. And that pawn is already on h5. White's queen pouring into the game with queen f3, attacking the f4 pawn. And now posturing for position, moving to g4, and Carlsen repositioning his rook from e8 to f8, lending a little bit more support to the f4 pawn. But here comes Nepo's rook to e1, x-raying Black's queen. 3 seconds for the world champion. And with just under 3 seconds, he plays rook f5. Nepo moves his king over to f1. He's threatening a discovery with 1 second for Carlsen. He didn't make it. He did not make it. He moved his rook back to f8, but was not in time. Fantastic game by Jan Nepomniachtchi. He just kept the pressure going. And if you like this video, make sure to click the link in the playlist for more of these Blitz videos. Thank you so much for watching.